History remembers its great men not only for what they built, but for what they dared to destroy. Some reformers build slowly, with patience and care. Others burn the past to forge the future. In the late 17th century, on the vast and frozen plains of Russia, a young czar would rise who refused to accept his country's fate. He was restless, violent, visionary, a storm trapped in a man's body. His name was Peter the Great. And through his relentless will, Russia, once a distant, isolated kingdom, would become an empire that stood shoulder to shoulder with Europe's greatest powers. But greatness never comes without a cost. This is the story of how one man dragged a nation into modernity, and in doing so, changed the course of world history forever. The Sleeping Giant. Before Peter's birth in 1672, Russia was a sleeping giant, vast in size, poor in spirit. Its borders stretched across endless forests and steppes, but it was cut off from the great movements of Europe: the Renaissance, the Reformation, the Enlightenment. While Europe debated philosophy and built ships to conquer oceans, Russia's rulers clung to medieval traditions and religious dogma. Its economy was agrarian, its nobles ruled by birth, and its people were bound to the land as serfs, peasants without freedom. To Europe, Russia was a mysterious, half-Asian kingdom, powerful in size but primitive in thought, and to many Russians themselves, that was simply how the world was meant to be. But to one young boy, curious, fierce, and impatient, it was not enough. The boy who would be Tsar, Peter Alexeyevich Romanov, was not raised for the throne. The Russian court of his youth was a nest of intrigue, rival factions, assassinations, coups. At 10 years old, Peter saw blood on the walls of the Kremlin when his half-sister's allies murdered members of his family. He learned early that power was fragile, that to survive in Russia you had to seize it with both hands. But rather than retreat into court politics, Peter turned his curiosity outward. He studied carpentry, navigation, anatomy, and mathematics. He mingled with foreign craftsmen in Moscow's German quarter, where he first saw ships, real ships, and fell in love with the idea of the sea. To most Russians, ships were strange European toys. To Peter, they were destiny. The Grand Embassy. In 1697, Peter did something no Russian ruler had ever dared. He left his country in disguise. He traveled through the great cities of Europe, Amsterdam, London, Vienna, not as a monarch, but as a student. He learned to build ships with his own hands, studied military science, engineering, and urban design. This journey, known as the Grand Embassy, was Peter's window into the modern world. In the shipyards of the Netherlands, he watched men build fleets. In England, he saw organized navies, modern schools, and disciplined armies. He realized painfully how far behind Russia truly was. And when he returned home, he vowed to change that, by any means necessary. The Reformer Tsar. Peter's reforms were not gentle. He ruled with an iron will and a black temper. He reorganized the army from feudal levies into a modern professional force. He built a navy from nothing, Russia's first, and personally designed ships for it. He replaced old boyar councils with a bureaucratic system that rewarded ability, not birth. He rewrote court etiquette, dress codes, even the calendar. He forced nobles to shave their beards, a shocking symbol of westernization. He sent sons of aristocrats abroad to study science and engineering. The Russian Orthodox Church, long the pillar of traditional power, was brought under state control. Peter would tolerate no rival authority, not in heaven, nor on earth. To some, he was a tyrant, to others, a visionary. To all, he was inevitable. The Great Northern War. In 1700, Peter faced his greatest test, the Great Northern War against Sweden, then one of Europe's most powerful kingdoms, led by the young and brilliant Charles X. For years, Russia suffered humiliating defeats, but Peter learned, adapted, and rebuilt. At the Battle of Poltava in 1709, His reformed army crushed the Swedish forces, marking the rise of Russia as a European military power. The war raged for 21 years. When it ended in 1721, Russia stood victorious. It gained access to the Baltic Sea, opening its long-awaited window to the west. To celebrate this triumph, Peter took a new title, Emperor of all Russia. The Tsardom had become an empire, the birth of St. Petersburg. In 1703, on the swampy shores of the Neva River, Peter began building a city that would symbolize his new empire. He named it St. Petersburg, after his patron saint. Tens of thousands of laborers, soldiers, and peasants toiled in the mud, digging canals, laying stones, dying in the thousands. It was a brutal project. But out of the marsh rose a city of marble and domes, a bridge between east and west. In 1712, Peter moved the capital from Moscow to this new city. To him, Moscow represented the old Russia, religious, conservative, inward-looking. St. Petersburg was the future, rational, European, imperial. When visitors from Europe arrived, they were stunned to find not a kingdom of peasants, but a metropolis of grandeur and ambition. Russia had arrived. The empire ascends. Peter's empire was vast and restless. It stretched from the Baltic to the Pacific and from the Arctic to the Black Sea. He expanded trade, built factories, founded schools, and established the Academy of Sciences. He introduced modern taxation, built new industries, and modernized agriculture. For the first time, Russia could stand beside Britain, France, and Austria, not as a student, but as a rival. Europe could no longer ignore Russia. It was too powerful, too modern, too imperial. The sleeping giant had awakened. The price of progress. But progress, under Peter, came at a terrible cost. Tens of thousands died in his building projects. His reforms crushed traditional culture. His methods were ruthless, even toward his own family. When his son Alexei opposed his reforms, Peter had him tortured and executed for treason. It broke him and marked him forever. Peter wanted to make Russia great, but he also made it dependent on autocratic rule, a system that would define its destiny for centuries. He had given Russia power, but not freedom. Death of the Emperor. In 1725, at the age of 52, Peter the Great died, exhausted, feverish, unrelenting to the end. He left behind a transformed nation, a state reborn from isolation into empire. In his lifetime, he built ships, cities, and armies. He broke centuries of tradition. He bent the will of a continent, and in his shadow, Russia became both admired and feared. Legacy of a giant. For 200 years after his death, the empire he built would dominate Eurasia. It would rise under Catherine the Great, endure wars, revolutions, and rebirths, each one tracing its roots back to Peter's vision. He did not merely build an empire, he built a national identity, one rooted in ambition, discipline, and destiny. But like all empires, his creation carried the seeds of contradiction. A modern state built by medieval force, a European empire born of Eastern despotism. Perhaps that is Peter's greatest paradox. The man who made Russia modern also made it eternal. History is not kind to men of moderation. It remembers the conquerors, the dreamers, the builders, those who dared to turn chaos into order. Peter the Great was all of these. He was brutal, brilliant, and boundless in ambition. He dragged a reluctant nation into the modern world, and in doing so, he ensured that Russia would never again be ignored. Empires rise and fall, but the will to transform, to seize destiny, that is eternal. This is the legacy of Peter the Great. If you found this exploration insightful, give this video a like, share it with a friend, and subscribe to Timeless Questions channel for more deep dives into philosophy, history, and human nature. Because the questions may be ancient, but the wisdom is timeless.